At 3 o'clock in the morning, the farm was supposed to be quiet. No tractors running, no trucks coming down the gravel drive, no customers pulling up to the farm stand. Just the low hum of insects in the ditch, the soft creak of the greenhouse plastic, and the dark line of woods sitting beyond the vegetable field like it had been there forever. But on that morning, something was standing between the woods and the crop, a big white dog. He stood beside the fence with his head lifted and his body still, almost like he had been planted there. His coat caught just enough moonlight to make him look larger than he really was. He was not barking like a house dog at a passing car. He was not running up and down the fence like he had lost his mind. He was watching. On the other side of the fence, 3 deer had come out of the tree line. They were close enough to smell the young squash leaves, close enough to see the rows of kale and lettuce that had taken weeks of work to get started, close enough to do the kind of damage that does not look like much from a distance, but can ruin a farmer's whole morning before the sun even comes up. The dog took 2 slow steps forward. Then he barked once, deep, low, certain. The deer froze. The dog did not chase them. He did not throw himself at the fence. He just stood there, letting the sound roll across the field. The deer turned. A second later, they disappeared back into the woods. From the farmhouse porch, Ethan Cole stood in his socks, holding a flashlight he had forgotten to turn on. He looked at the dog. Then he looked at the field. For the first time in months, the crop was still there. And for a farmer like Ethan, still, there was a beautiful thing. Ethan's farm sat on 37 acres in western Pennsylvania, tucked between a county road, a creek, and a stretch of hardwood trees that looked harmless in the daylight. In spring, the place was green and busy. Rows of lettuce, kale, sweet corn, tomatoes in the high tunnel, pumpkins in the backfield. A patch of beans that always seemed to need weeding no matter what week it was. From the road, it looked like the kind of small farm people like to take pictures of in October. A red barn, a hand-painted sign, sunflowers near the driveway, and a little farm stand where customers could buy tomatoes, eggs, sweet corn, and whatever else Ethan and his wife Laura had managed to harvest that week. But pictures did not show the bills. They did not show the seed invoices on the kitchen table. They did not show the cracked water line behind the greenhouse. They did not show the mornings when Ethan walked out to the field and found 20 feet of lettuce bitten down like somebody had taken scissors to it. They did not show the sweet corn pulled sideways by raccoons, half-eaten and left in the mud like trash. They did not show the cabbage starts clipped off by rabbits. They did not show the deer tracks in the soft ground after a rain. Every farm has problems, but some problems come back every year, like they own the place. For Ethan, it was the animals coming out of the woods. At first, he tried to handle it the normal ways. More fencing, better latches, motion lights, scare tape, a radio left playing low near the corn. A couple of store-bought repellents that smelled bad enough to make him wonder who hated who more, the deer or the farmer. Some things worked for a week, some worked for 3 days. Some worked until the animals got used to them. That was the part that wore him down. Wild animals learn. A light is scary the first night. A flapping ribbon is strange the first week. A fence is a problem until something finds the low spot. And once one deer finds the gap, every deer in the county seems to get the news. By early June, Ethan was keeping notes because guessing had stopped helping. June 3rd, deer damage in kale, row 2. June 5th, raccoon damage in early corn. June 8th, rabbits near the east fence. June 10th, deer inside lower field again. Gate was closed. Need to find entry point. The notebook did not fix anything, but it told the truth. And the truth was getting expensive. One evening, after a long day of replanting squash, Ethan drove to a feed store outside town for fencing staples and chick feed. He was tired enough that he almost forgot why he had come in. That was where he first heard about the dog. Not from an ad, not from a trainer, from an old farmer standing near the counter, talking about a Great Pyrenees that had guarded goats for 11 years and now needed a new place because the family was selling their herd. Big white thing, the man said. Stays out all night. Barks at shadows. Doesn't care much for strangers. But I'll tell you what, nothing crossed that pasture unless he allowed it. The cashier laughed. Sounds like a bad neighbor. The old farmer shook his head. Sounds like a working dog. Ethan picked up a bag of feed and tried not to look too interested. He knew about livestock guardian dogs. Everybody who had been around farms had heard of them. Great Pyrenees, Anatolian shepherds, Maremas, big dogs bred to stay with animals and keep predators away. But Ethan did not have sheep. He did not have goats. He had vegetables. Nobody got a guardian dog for lettuce. At least, that was what he told himself on the drive home. But the thought stayed with him, not because it sounded easy. It did not. A dog that big would need training, fencing, food, vet care, patience, and a job it understood. A dog like that was not a porch decoration. It was not something you bought because you liked the way it looked in pictures. Still, Ethan kept thinking about the woods, the deer, the raccoons, the way the field seemed to belong to everything after dark except the people trying to grow food in it. 2 days later, he called the number the old farmer had given him. The dog's name was Boone. He was 5 years old, large, white, stubborn, and serious. His old owner said he had spent his whole life around goats and chickens. He was good with livestock, suspicious of coyotes, and known to bark at things nobody else could see. "He's not a pet dog," the man said over the phone. "I understand," Ethan said. "I mean it. He's friendly enough once he knows you, but he's not going to fetch a tennis ball and sleep on your couch." "I don't need a couch dog." "What do you need?" Ethan looked out the kitchen window toward the lower field. "I need something to convince the deer and raccoons that my farm is not open all night." There was a pause. Then the man said, "Well, Boone might have an opinion about that." Ethan brought him home on a gray Saturday morning. Boone rode in the back of the truck like he was not impressed with the situation. When they pulled into the farm, he stood up, looked at the barn, the greenhouse, the chicken coop, the vegetable rows, the woods, and then Ethan. His face said one thing clearly: "This better be worth my time." Laura came out onto the porch and crossed her arms. "He's bigger than you said. He looks smaller in the picture. He looks like a polar bear with responsibilities." Boone stepped down from the truck, sniffed the gravel, and immediately walked to the edge of the field, not to the house. Not to the porch, not to the food bowl, the field. Ethan noticed that. He did not turn Boone loose that first day. That was the part people later forgot when they told the story. They liked to say Ethan got a big dog and the dog saved the farm. That was not what happened. Animals do not become useful just because people are desperate. You have to give them structure. You have to show them the borders. You have to set them up to succeed before you expect them to solve anything. So Ethan started slow. He built a fenced night run along the edge of the vegetable field, close enough to the crops for Boone to smell the deer trails, but not so open that he could wander into the road or scare customers at the stand. He walked the fence line with him every morning and every evening. He taught him the gates. He let him smell the chicken coop, the greenhouse, the wash station, the corn patch, the pumpkin field, and the old stone wall where the rabbits liked to come through. He introduced Boone to the delivery driver, then to the neighbor's boy who helped on Saturdays, then to the sound of the tractor, then to Laura carrying harvest bins, then to customers at the farm stand from a distance, one step at a time. Boone did not make it simple. On the second night, he barked from midnight to 2:30 in the morning. On the third morning, Ethan found a hole started near the fence where Boone had decided the earth needed rearranging. On the fourth day, he planted himself in the middle of the walkway between the lettuce beds and refused to move until Laura went around him with a crate of greens. "He's guarding the path now," she said. "Maybe the path looked threatened. He's guarding it from me. He'll learn." Laura looked at the giant white dog, who had closed his eyes like a retired judge. He better. By the end of the first week, the neighbors knew. That was how rural places worked. If you fixed a roof, people knew. If you bought a tractor, people knew. If you brought home a 120-pound dog and he barked at the woods all night, people definitely knew. Ethan heard about it at the gas station. "Got yourself a bear dog? He's a guardian dog." "For what?" "The vegetable field." The man at the next pump laughed before he could stop himself. "You got a dog guarding cabbage?" "Kale, mostly." That made the man laugh harder. At the feed store, somebody asked if Boone was on payroll. At the farmer's market, a customer asked if the dog came with the tomatoes. Ethan smiled when he had to. He did not explain more than necessary. Explaining takes energy, and at that point, he needed the energy for work. Because Boone was not magic. Boone needed feeding. Boone needed brushing. Boone needed correction when he barked at the mail carrier like the man had come to steal the moon. Boone needed praise when he came back from the fence instead of charging along it. Boone needed time to understand that the field, the chickens, the farm stand, the people who belonged there, and the crops all fell under one big idea. Home. That was the word Ethan used. "Home, Boone." When they walked the fence line, Home. When Boone stopped at the woods and lifted his head, home. When he lay near the greenhouse at dusk, watching the shadows stretch across the rows, home. By the second week, Ethan started seeing small changes. Not dramatic ones. No big movie moment where the wild animals packed their bags and left the county. Just less. Less chewing on the outer rows. Less corn pulled down. Fewer fresh deer tracks inside the fence. The motion camera by the east corner caught a deer stepping out of the woods, staring toward the field, and then turning away when Boone came into frame. Another night, the camera caught 3 raccoons moving along the creek bank. Boone barked from near the corn, and the raccoons disappeared under the brush. Ethan watched that clip 5 times at the kitchen table. Laura watched it twice. Then she looked at Boone, who was asleep under the window with one muddy paw on top of the other. "Well," she said, "he does have a job." Ethan nodded. "He knows it too." He wrote it down. June 21st. Deer stopped at East Fence. Camera confirms Boone present. June 23rd. No new damage in kale. June 24th. Raccoon tracks by creek, but no corn damage. June 26th. Boone barking at 1:40 a.m. Checked field. No entry. Worth the sleep loss? Maybe. That was the kind of note only a farmer would understand. Maybe was not a small word. Maybe meant the door was still open. Maybe meant the idea had not failed yet. By the 3rd week, the first real test came. A storm rolled in hard from the west, bending the trees and throwing rain across the farm like gravel. The power flickered twice. The greenhouse plastic snapped and popped. Water ran in little rivers through the paths between the fields. Storm nights were bad nights for fences. Branches fall, gates shift, animals move. The next morning, Ethan went out expecting trouble. He found it near the lower corner. A limb had come down on the fence and pushed the wire low enough for a deer to step over if it wanted to. And something had come close. There were tracks in the mud outside the field. Several of them. Deer. Tracks. They stopped 10 feet from the broken section. Inside the fence, Boone was standing in the rain with mud up to his ankles, looking tired and proud and very pleased with himself. There were no deer tracks inside, no chewed lettuce, no trampled squash, no ruined row. Ethan stood there for a while with his raincoat dripping down his neck. Then he said, "Good dog." Boone wagged his tail once. Not too much. He was not that kind of dog. That morning, Ethan called the county extension office. He had called them before about insect pressure, soil tests, and high tunnel questions. This time, he felt a little strange. "I've got a question about livestock guardian dogs," he said. "For livestock?" "Well," Ethan said, "vegetables mostly." There was a pause on the other end. Then the woman said, "That's a new one, but I can send Mark out. He's worked with small farms and wildlife pressure." Mark Ellison came out the following Tuesday. He wore work boots, carried a clipboard, and had the calm look of a man who had seen enough farm experiments to know that odd did not always mean wrong. He walked the fence with Ethan. He looked at the camera clips. He looked at the deer trails coming out of the woods. He watched Boone patrol along the field edge, stop by the gate, smell the ground, and then settle in the shade where he could see the corn and the tree line at the same time. Mark did not say much at first. That made Ethan nervous. Finally, Mark said, "He's not replacing your fence. No. He's not going to stop every rabbit. I figured that. And if you don't manage him, he can become his own problem. He's already tried." Mark smiled a little. But I'll tell you what, he's adding pressure. Ethan looked at him. Pressure, presence, scent, sound, movement, territory. A lot of wildlife doesn't want to fight. It wants an easy meal. "Your job is to make this field feel like a bad choice." Boone barked once from the shade, as if he agreed. Mark pointed toward him. "That dog makes it feel occupied." Ethan liked that word. Occupied. For months, the field had felt like it belonged to anything that could sneak in after dark. Now it felt claimed. Not perfectly, not permanently, but enough to matter. That evening, Ethan made a new page in the notebook. Boone Field Protection Plan. He drew a rough map of the farm. He marked the weak points. East fence, creek bank, lower corn, pumpkin edge, chicken coop, farm stand. He changed Boone's route so the dog had access to the areas with the worst nighttime damage. He moved the water bowl closer to the east corner. He added a shaded platform near the corn so Boone could watch without lying in the mud. He put up clearer signs at the farm stand so customers knew not to enter the field without asking. The system got better. Not because Boone changed overnight, because Ethan did. He stopped thinking of the dog as a solution and started thinking of him as one layer. The fence was a layer. The motion cameras were a layer. Good gates were a layer. Clean field edges were a layer. Harvest timing was a layer. And Boone was the living layer, the one with ears, the one with a nose, the one that did not need a battery, but did need breakfast. By midsummer, the farm began to feel different. The kale that had been replanted twice finally held. The corn still had a little damage, but nowhere near what Ethan expected. The pumpkins along the back field made it through the tender stage without being chewed down to sad green sticks. Even the chickens seemed calmer, though Laura said that might have been wishful thinking. Boone had started sleeping during the hottest part of the day near the wash station, where he could keep an eye on everyone while pretending not to care. Customers noticed him. At first, some were nervous. Then they got used to seeing him behind the fence, big and white and serious, watching the farm stand like he had been appointed by the county. A little girl who came every Saturday with her grandmother started calling him the Pumpkin Guard. Boone did not answer to it, but Ethan did. "How's the Pumpkin Guard today?" the grandmother asked one morning. "On duty," Ethan said. Boone was lying in the shade with his eyes half closed. "Looks like he's sleeping. He's Union." The grandmother laughed and bought 2 baskets of tomatoes. By August, the jokes had changed. That was how Ethan knew people were starting to believe. At first, they had laughed at the idea. Then they had laughed at the dog. Now they laughed with the story. A neighbor named Carl stopped by one evening and leaned on the fence. Carl had a sweet corn patch on the other side of the creek, and every year Raccoons treated it like a free buffet. He watched Boone walk the edge of the vegetable rows. That dog really keeping them out? "Not all of them," Ethan said, "but some." "Enough." Carl scratched his chin. "How much enough?" Ethan gave him the numbers. Carl stopped scratching. "That much?" "That much so far." Carl looked at the dog again. "He ever bite anybody?" "No." "He chased the deer?" "Not if I can help it. Mostly he tells them this place is taken." Carl nodded slowly. "Think one would work over by my corn?" Ethan looked across the creek. Different field, different fences, different roads, different problems. "Maybe," he said, "but you'd need better fencing first. And you'd have to train the dog to the place. And you'd better be ready for barking." Carl frowned. "You giving me advice or talking me out of it?" "Yes," Ethan said. Carl laughed. "Hi, Carl." That was the first time anyone asked Ethan how it worked instead of why he was doing it. After that, things changed slowly. Mark from the extension office asked if he could bring 2 other growers by to look at the setup. The feed store owner started asking for updates on the cabbage dog. Laura made a small sign for the farm stand that said, "Please do not enter the field. Working farm dog on duty." A customer took a picture of Boone lying beside the pumpkin patch and posted it online. For 2 weeks, people came to buy vegetables and ask about the big white dog protecting the crops. Ethan did not love that part. He was not trying to become famous. He was trying to keep deer out of the kale. But he had to admit, the story helped. People liked buying food from a place with a story. They liked knowing the farm was not just machines, sprays, plastic, and invoices. They liked seeing something alive, protecting something alive. And Boone, whether he knew it or not, became part of what the farm meant. Not a mascot, not a petting zoo animal, a worker, a strange one maybe, a loud one, a muddy one, a worker all the same. The season did not end perfectly. No season does. In late August, rabbits got into the bean patch through a gap Ethan should have fixed sooner. One night, Boone barked so long at a possum near the compost pile that Laura came downstairs and said, "Either that dog is saving the farm or he is arguing with a trash bag." A week later, Boone rolled in something dead near the creek and made everyone regret having noses. There were still problems. There were always problems. But when Ethan sat down near the end of September with the notebook, the numbers told a story that felt different from the year before. Less deer damage in the lower field, less raccoon damage in the corn, fewer emergency replants, more harvestable kale, more pumpkins reaching size, fewer mornings that began with Ethan standing in the field, staring at destruction, and trying not to take it personally. The savings were not dramatic in the way people want stories to be dramatic. Boone did not save $1 million farm. He did not turn a bad year into a perfect one. He did not make farming easy, but he kept enough crops standing to matter. And on a small farm, enough is not a small thing. Enough pays a bill. Enough fills a market table. Enough keeps a customer coming back. Enough lets a family farm make it to next spring. On the last big harvest morning of the season, Ethan walked the pumpkin field before sunrise. The air was cold enough to make his hands stiff. The vines were tired, the leaves were spotted and fading, but the pumpkins were there, orange and heavy under the first gray light of morning. Boone walked ahead of him along the edge of the field. He stopped at the fence, sniffed the ground, looked toward the woods, then looked back at Ethan like he had found nothing worth reporting. Ethan smiled. A year earlier, he would have walked that same edge with a flashlight and a knot in his stomach, wondering what had been eaten overnight. Now he walked it with a dog in front of him. That did not make him fearless, but it made him less alone. A few days later, after most of the pumpkins had been sold and the last sweet corn was gone, Ethan took the old notebook inside and set it on the kitchen table. On the cover he wrote, "Boone Field Trial Year 1. Laura saw it and smiled. Trial? Trial. Not success? Not yet. Boone was asleep by the back door, muddy, tired, and taking up more room than seemed physically necessary. Ethan looked at him. "A trial is honest," he said. "It means we tested it. It means we watched. It means we learned what worked and what didn't." Laura poured coffee into 2 mugs. And we're doing it again next year." Outside, the woods stood quiet beyond the field. They did not look different. The deer were still out there. The raccoons were still out there. The rabbits were definitely still out there. The farm had not defeated nature, and Ethan did not want to think of it that way anymore. That was the thing Boone had taught him. A farm is not a fortress. It is a place full of borders, between wild and planted, between risk and harvest, between what people can control and what they have to respect. For a long time, Ethan had thought protecting the crop meant building higher fences, buying brighter lights, and fighting harder against everything that came out of the woods. Some of that still mattered, but it was not the whole answer. Sometimes protection had 4 legs. Sometimes it had muddy paws. Sometimes it barked at 2 in the morning and scared your neighbors and sleeps in the exact place you need to walk. Sometimes the thing that saves part of your crop is not quiet, clean, cheap, or convenient. Sometimes it is alive. That winter, Boone got a better shelter near the equipment shed, with a clear view of the lower field and the chicken coop. Ethan built it stronger than the first one, because temporary things have a way of teaching you what permanent things need. He fixed the weak fence corners. He moved the camera higher. He added another gate near the creek. He bought a bigger brush because Boone's coat collected half the farm every time he walked past a burr patch. And when the seed catalogs came in January, Ethan planned the fields with Boone's route in mind. That was when he knew the dog had become part of the farm. Not an experiment sitting off to the side, not a funny story for customers, part of the plan. On a cold morning in March, before the first transplants went into the ground, Ethan walked out to the empty field. The rows were not planted yet. The air smelled like wet soil and old leaves. The woods were still bare enough that he could see deep between the trees. Boone walked beside him, older than he had been last spring, but just as serious. At the edge of the field, the dog stopped. He looked into the woods. Then he lifted his head and barked once. The sound moved across the empty rows. Ethan looked down at him. "Nothing's even planted yet," he said. Boone did not care. The field was still the field. The job was still the job. And maybe that was the point. Protection does not begin when the damage starts. It begins before anything has a chance to disappear. Most people who first saw Boone saw a problem. Too big, too loud, too stubborn, too much work. And to be fair, they were not completely wrong. He was all of those things. But trouble was not the whole story. Sometimes a thing is loud because it is paying attention. Sometimes a thing is stubborn because it knows its place. Sometimes the thing everyone calls too much is only waiting for the right job, the right boundary, and someone patient enough to let it prove what it can do. Ethan opened the gate and started toward the greenhouse. Boone walked ahead of him, not graceful, not quiet, not the kind of farm tool you could park in a shed and forget about, but useful. And on a farm like Ethan's, useful was a beautiful thing. So if this story found you at the right time, share it with someone who has ever been told their idea was too strange to work. Leave your town or state in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from. And if you have ever seen an animal protect a farm, a garden, a home, or even a person who needed it, I would like to hear that story too.